Hello everyone. Today's video comes as a result of getting my first question on the channel. Came from user Matt. Should be easy for me to remember. We want to get into how to address his problem and what his question and problem is. It's going to lead into other things. I want to try and keep the videos shorter and simpler. So there's a second part to his question that will probably be in another video, because I don't want this to just drag on too long and then nobody wants to invest that kind of time into it. If you would rather that they were put together and it was longer, like 20 minutes, then I guess let me know in the comments if you prefer something like that. I want this to be user driven and what you guys, the viewers, like and how you like it. This is all still new, obviously, on the channel, so I want to make sure that I'm doing it to how everyone's going to like and appreciate it. So anyways, with that, I'll get into Matt's problem, his question, and we'll see how we can help him. So he bought a truck recently. It's a used truck, and it has two aftermarket lights wired up on his rear bumper that aren't working. He does have two switches on his dash. He doesn't know which one would be for the lights, or even if any of them are for the lights, but either way, nothing happening at the lights. So he's got a couple things. He's got to trace wiring and the circuit. He has to know what kind of circuit he's dealing with, and then he has to know how to test that circuit. So there's a few parts to this as far as how to tackle this problem. I don't want to get too in depth. As I said, I want it to be a little bit simpler. So we'll just look at a couple different circuits of what he's possibly dealing with. I'll get in more depth in a future video about electrical and automotive electrical, but I want to make sure that Matt has help with his problem. As a side, I did message him and reply directly, because I didn't want him waiting on this video in order to get started working on his truck. Wanted him to at least get going on it, and I'm just hoping this will add to that reply and hopefully give him more direction to go and help others, since aftermarket lighting is becoming very common with light bars, things like that. This would all fall in the same category and the same way to approach it. So anyways, so we'll just say this is our battery, positive and negative, 12 volts. More like 12.6 in a truck, in an automotive battery, but that's okay. So you're gonna have a wire coming out. There's a switch. There's our light, and then back down to ground somewhere, or to the negative post of the battery. Sweet light. Anyways, so this is what they're gonna call power side or positive side control, because the switch is on the positive or the power side of the circuit. Your load, or your light in this case, is what separates the circuit. So everything before it is on the power side, everything after it is on the ground side, so positive and negative. So this is probably the simplest way of wiring in an aftermarket light. It's not the best way, but it's the simplest way. So odds are this is what Matt is dealing with if somebody did this themselves. So the way that this circuit is going to work is you have a wire coming off of the battery. It goes through the firewall to the switch on your dash, which is the input part of the switch. The other side of the switch, the output part, then goes out, back through the firewall, and then under the truck, back to that light. And then from the light, you would have a wire that goes to ground. Now, you could wire it all the way back to the battery, but that's, an extra 10, 12 feet of wiring that you don't have to do. You can just go to a good ground somewhere, because the chassis is grounded. So anywhere that's metal and good and clean, off the bumper, off a bracket, off the frame, somewhere back there, that's where it would be grounded. And then you don't waste all that wiring. So anyways, so now to test this, now also what I didn't show in here is there hopefully would also be a fuse in here, which would be like that. That's not a very good drawing of a fuse, but that's roughly what the symbol for fuse is. I'll try and get better at it. I'm not an artist. Anyways, so you can tackle this one of two ways starting out. You can go from the battery side, the positive side, or you can go from the other side of the light. That either way would work. So you can start up here, check your fuse first, see if the fuse is good. Make sure this wire is hooked up to the battery. But he also needs to identify if this is actually this type of circuit. So if you got to trace the wiring in order to figure that out first, that this is indeed how this is wired. So tracing is kind of one of the first steps, but it doesn't really matter what circuit it is, as long as you can figure out where your power is and where you don't have it, what's broken, what's unhooked, is the light just broken, so on and so forth. So check the fuse first, because if it's the fuse, then obviously you found your problem really quickly. They usually blow for a reason. Maybe it's under what it should be, is then you have a 10 amp fuse in a circuit that's actually drawing 15 amps or 20 amps even, depending on what these lights are. They can draw that kind of power. Sorry about that, I have a cat and clearly he's interested in the video. Anyways, so the after the fuse, you want to get to your switch. So if your fuse is good, the fuse should just be in like a small strip of wire. It's going to have like a little plastic cover. Fuse goes in it. That's how it works. So that should be pretty simple to check and find. Trace the wire back through the firewall, find it to the switch, which switch it goes to, and then find, do I have power at the input of the switch? If you do, great, all this is good. Then you close the switch, check to make sure you have power on the output side of the switch, because then you know your switch is actually working and doing its job. Then you go back to the light. Take the connector off the light or however it's wired, check for power going into the light. If you have power going into the light, good. You know all the wiring from the switch to the light is good. If you don't, then you need to check all that wiring and fix what you find broken. So if you do have power at the light, then you need to start checking your ground for a ground issue. Inspect this wire, make sure the wire is good. You can use a jumper wire if you have one in order to hook up to this side of the light and then go to a ground that you find. If the light turns on, you just fixed your problem. You know it's a bad ground, rewire your ground, and you're good to go. Now the other way of doing this, I do have a towel here. Instead of the switch being on the power side, switch on the ground side. Now this is technically a better way of wiring up a circuit like this. Reason being, if the switch is on the power side or the positive side, every time you open and close that switch, all the power of that circuit is running through that switch. So it'll arc, it'll wear. You need to make sure you get a switch that's rated for that kind of amperage. It's a lot harder on the switch. It can fail easier. On the ground side, all you're doing is simply completing the circuit to ground. It's after the load, after the light, technically speaking. So the light takes up the power. That's what draws the power in the circuit. So instead of all that current having to flow through the switch, all that current is used up by the light, and the switch is just controlling the ground. Better for the circuit, better for the switch, all in all. However, in a situation like this, if you're not doing it with a relay, it does use some more wiring because of the nature of the way it goes. But either way, you need to wire to the light. So it is what it is. Anyways. So trace your wiring. If it's like this, you're going to have a power. This is why it'd be more wiring in this case without a relay, especially being on the rear bumper. So it's another reason why I don't think it's this way, but I'll go over it quickly. So same thing, you still need a fuse. This time your power wire would go straight out to the light, and then instead of the ground side of the light going just straight to ground, it's going to come back up the truck, back through the firewall to the switch on this side. And then the switch is just going to have a little wire off it going to ground under the dash. There's lots of stuff under there you can ground to, lots of little metal brackets and components. No big deal, easy to do. So that's another possibility, but in this situation, it's unlikely. The way you would test this, essentially the same. You can start at the light or you can start up at the battery. If you're starting at the light, well, I guess you would more start at the switch, but I would still check the fuse first. Power to the light, you got power? No, check between them. You got power after the light? Yes, go to the switch. Do you got power at the switch? No, you got your problem between the light and the switch. Flick the switch, do you got power here? Yes, then that's going to mean that you most likely have your bad ground again, or key player it seems. But it's not always just the ground. I'm just saying if you've eliminated everything else, you're at the end of the circuit, you need to make sure you have a good ground. So you can do the same thing, jump that side of the switch to ground, make sure the switch is activated. If the light turns on, you fixed your problem. So the better way of doing a ground side control, I'll just touch on it briefly here, would be with a relay. This is what you would get if you bought like a kit from a parts store or from Amazon or any of those kinds of places. You would get a kit that came with your wiring harness that had a relay, had the switch, had everything. And the way a relay works, it's typically drawn something like that. And then that's a coil of wire built inside to it. And a relay is basically an electronic switch, as in it switches itself using power. So you have 4 terminals now, so you have a bit more wiring to do as in to hook it up. But overall you'd have less wiring because you're not running a wire back to the light. The reason being, and the reason why you use a relay is, yes, to save wiring, but it also, you're using a low current to switch a high current. So now you could have a no-nothing switch. It doesn't have to handle much current at all, because all it's doing is controlling the relay. And then what it outputs to is the light. So you use a heavier gauge wire here, use a lighter gauge wire on that side, and it's a lot better for the circuit. You still want to fuse both sides because you don't want an issue there. If something grounds out, you still want the fuse to blow, you don't want to burn up some wires. But anyways, so this would get wired in, and you would run the low side. This would be the low side, let's call it that. That'll be the high side. So low side is going to go from the battery to the fuse, fuse to the relay, and then the relay to the switch. So you run that wire through the firewall to the switch goes to ground, just like shown here. So that's easy. Now so this section comes off of the relay now. So when that switch is flipped on, it activates this, switches this over. This is also hooked up to the battery, 12 volts, and this side goes out to the light. So out to the light, and then that's how the light gets its power. So now you just have a wire to the light, doesn't even ever go through the truck. Just goes straight under the truck out to those lights at the back, and they get their power. You ground them to the bumper or bracket, frame, whatever you find there that's a good clean ground, not painted. You need to make sure it's something good. We'll go in more how to fix that kind of wiring or to wire this up properly yourself in another video. I just wanted to get into this about how you go about diagnosing that, where you're checking for your powers, how you're checking for your powers and all that. So hopefully this gives Matt enough to get going.
Get going on his truck is what I was going to say there, but my camera cut out. I was having camera trouble, and it happened to me again on another video I was trying to record, so I'm sorry about that. I'm still learning, trying to figure this all out. But anyways, I hope that was enough information to help Matt out, and if it wasn't, please let me know. And anyone else, hopefully it helps you as well with a similar problem. If you'd like to see more or want me to get more in depth, just let me know. Send me a message or a comment. And I'm still learning this whole process and what people are going to like and want. So, I'm open to suggestions. So hit me up. So thanks for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you liked it. And remember, there are no dumb questions, just the one you don't ask. So if you have a question, ask this mechanic. Take care.